The mountains are beautiful during the day. Sunlight spilling across endless ridges, deer moving quietly through the brush, the air alive with birdsong. But when the light fades, beauty gives way to something else. In the Blue Ridge, in the Smokies, in any of those national parks, the night presses in like a weight. And for the rangers who patrol those vast forests, there are things they hear that they never forget. One ranger, a man with years of service and a reputation for steady nerves, once told of an evening patrol that turned into something he still refuses to explain. It was early autumn, the leaves dry and brittle underfoot, when he set off along a trail that cut through a thick stand of pines. The forest was unusually quiet that night, the kind of silence that amplifies every sound. The crunch of boots, the sigh of the wind, the distant creak of branches rubbing together. And then, without warning, he heard it. A cry. It was faint, high-pitched, drifting through the trees. At first, he thought it was an animal, perhaps a fox or a bobcat. But as he stood still, listening, the sound came again. This time it was unmistakable, the cry of a child. Thin, frantic, echoing from deeper in the woods. His training compelled him to follow. Children had gone missing in these mountains before, and every second mattered. He called out, his voice carrying into the night, but there was no reply. Only the crying, distant and wavering, always a little further ahead. He pressed on, torch beam cutting through the blackness, the pines crowding tighter around him. The strange thing was how the sound moved. It never stayed in one place. Sometimes it was to his left, sometimes to his right, sometimes directly ahead, always pulling him further from the marked trail. He checked his bearings often, marking trees as he went, but unease gnawed at him. The air grew colder, the ground softer, and still the cries continued. Fainter now, weaker, like a child on the verge of collapse. At last, he stumbled into a small clearing. The crying stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, pressing into his ears until even his own breathing seemed too loud. He swept the torch across the clearing. Nothing. No footprints in the soil, no broken branches, no sign of a child. Then came the whisper. Not a cry this time, but a voice, soft and close, as though spoken directly into his ear. He could not make out the words, only the cadence, wrong somehow, the rise and fall of syllables that seemed human yet hollow. His torch flickered, and in the beam's last sputter of light, he thought he saw movement at the edge of the clearing. A pale shape crouched low, eyes glinting faintly before vanishing into the trees. The ranger did not follow. He turned back the way he had come, moving quickly, heart hammering, marking his path with desperate urgency. Behind him, the crying began again, faint and mocking, as though it followed him out of the woods. He made it back to the trail, shaken but alive. Search teams were sent the next morning, combing the area thoroughly. No child was ever found. No prints, no clothing, no sign of struggle. The forest was empty. Yet the ranger swore to his dying day that he had heard it. Not just once, but again and again in the years that followed, drifting through the pines whenever he patrolled at night. A child's cry, always just ahead, always luring him deeper into the dark. And though he never pursued it again, he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever made that sound was not a child. Some disappearances in the national parks leave behind chaos. Torn tents, scattered gear, the marks of a struggle. Others, however, are far more chilling because of what they don't show. One ranger's account still unsettles those who hear it. A campsite discovered deep in the forest, untouched, immaculate, yet completely deserted. It began when a family reported their relatives overdue from a weekend trip. They were experienced campers, the kind of people who respected the land and knew the rules of the park. Their car was located in a designated lot, permits in order, suggesting they had set out as planned. A team of rangers followed the trail toward the designated site, expecting to find the campers delayed, perhaps injured. What they found instead was something that defied sense. The tent was perfectly pitched, the fabric clean, the stakes driven firmly into the ground. The fire pit contained wood arranged in a neat pyramid, unburnt, as though someone had prepared to light it but never struck the match. Folding chairs surrounded the pit, set out evenly, one for each member of the family. On a nearby log sat a lantern, its glass polished, fuel topped up, wick trimmed. Food had been laid out as well, packets unopened, utensils placed neatly on a cloth. A kettle filled with water rested beside the pit, waiting to be boiled. Everything spoke of order, of a family who had just stepped away for a moment. Yet hours passed, and no one returned. The search team examined the area carefully. There were no signs of struggle, no broken branches, no scuffed soil, no blood. Their packs were inside the tent, clothes neatly folded. The sleeping bags were unrolled, plumped, as though prepared for use. But there were no footprints leading away, only the ones that had arrived. It was as if the family had simply stood up and vanished into the trees. Even stranger, the forest around the site felt wrong. Rangers described the silence as oppressive, unnatural, with not even the chirp of insects or the rustle of squirrels in the canopy. It was as though the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting. One ranger swore he saw shadows move in the corners of his eyes, flickers of pale shapes weaving between the trees, always gone when the torch turned. Night fell quickly, and the team was forced to leave, promising to return at first light. When they did, the campsite was still there. Still perfect, still waiting. But now coated in a fine layer of dew, as if untouched through the night. The food was damp, the kettle cold. The family was never found. To this day, no explanation exists. Locals whisper that the feral ones sometimes lure campers with silence, watching until the moment is right, then taking them swiftly, leaving everything behind as though mocking those who search. The neatness, the order, is part of the horror. It suggests the campers were not startled, not panicked, but lured away willingly, perhaps even hypnotized by voices carried on the wind. The abandoned campsite still lingers in ranger stories, a tableau frozen in time. And those who saw it firsthand agree on one thing. Nothing human could vanish so completely, so cleanly, without leaving even a single trace. Rangers in the national parks grow familiar with the language of the wilderness. They know the sharp scream of a fox, the deep rumble of a bear, the eerie wail of a bobcat. Each sound has its rhythm, its purpose, its place in the cycle of life and night. But one ranger described hearing something in the Blue Ridge that did not belong to any creature he had ever known. He called it a howl, though even that word fails to capture the way it crawled into his bones. It was late autumn, the air thin and brittle, when he was stationed alone in a fire watchtower. From the top, he could see miles of forest rolling into the distance, valleys heavy with mist, ridges fading into the black sky. The night was calm, silent but for the occasional stir of wind against the tower beams. He was writing notes in the logbook when it came. The sound rose from the valley floor, low at first, then stretching higher, twisting into a pitch that rattled the glass panes around him. It was not animal. It was not human. It was something caught in between, dragging its tones in a way that set his teeth on edge. It seemed to echo through the trees themselves, as though the forest was carrying it forward. He stepped outside onto the narrow platform, lantern in hand, scanning the darkness below. The howl came again, longer this time, layered, as if more than one throat were producing it. There was no pattern, no call and response, only a rising chorus that ended suddenly, leaving the silence thicker than before. At first, he tried to rationalize it. Perhaps coyotes, perhaps two animals overlapping. But deep down, he knew the sounds of the land, and this was not part of them. His unease deepened when the forest failed to respond. Normally, an outcry like that would set off a chain. Owls taking flight, deer crashing through undergrowth, smaller creatures rustling in alarm. Yet the woods remained still, untouched, almost expectant. The next moment froze him where he stood. A figure moved at the base of the tower. Not climbing, not approaching, simply circling. His lantern caught glimpses. Long limbs, pale skin, too gaunt for a human, too upright for an animal. And when the howl rose once more, it did not come from the valley but from directly beneath him, vibrating through the steel supports of the tower itself. He stumbled back inside, bolting the door though he knew the thin wood would not stop anything determined. The howl continued through the night, now distant, now close, as though something was testing the edges of his fear. By dawn it had stopped, and when the relief team arrived, the valley was once again calm and ordinary. The ranger told his story quietly, never officially logging it. But he warned others who took the tower shift to never ignore a sound that doesn't fit. The land has its voices, familiar and old. But when something new joins that chorus, it means the forest is no longer alone. And sometimes it is listening back. The watchtowers scattered across the national parks are lonely places. Perched high above the treeline, they grant the ranger an unmatched view of the wilderness, but demand long nights of silence and isolation. For some, the solitude is a comfort. For others, it is a breeding ground for unease. One ranger, stationed in an aging wooden tower, came to believe that something else shared those nights with him. Something that never climbed the stairs, yet was always there. The tower creaked with every gust of wind. Its timbers, seasoned by decades of storms, groaned in protest, and the lantern light often swayed as though moved by unseen hands. The ranger grew used to the noises, but one evening he began noticing something new. The sensation of being watched. It wasn't constant, not at first, just fleeting moments when the hairs at the back of his neck prickled and his pulse quickened. He would turn, expecting someone at the door, but the room remained empty, the night stretching endlessly beyond the glass windows. The feeling grew stronger as the weeks passed. It was as though the tower itself had acquired a presence, silent but intent. On one particular night, heavy with fog, the ranger kept catching movement in the corner of his eye. The shadows seemed thicker inside the room, clustering in corners that the lantern should have reached. He moved the light deliberately, sweeping it across the walls, but the darkness refused to break. It gathered instead, like smoke coiling in the rafters, always retreating just beyond his focus. And then came the first glimpse. As he leaned over the logbook, writing notes in the dim light, he noticed a reflection in the glass. Outside, beyond the thin pane, a figure stood, as black as the night behind it, featureless, tall. He spun around, heart hammering, but the platform was empty, the mist curling like pale fabric where the figure should have been. He told himself it was exhaustion, a trick of fog and nerves, but the reflection returned. Night after night, at odd hours, the shadow appeared. Sometimes it stood outside the window. Sometimes it lingered at the edge of the stairs below, faint but undeniable. And once, when the lantern sputtered low, it seemed to stand directly behind him, its outline sharp against the wall before vanishing as the flame flared again. He never heard footsteps. He never saw it approach. It simply arrived, always just far enough away to doubt, yet close enough to know it was real. The breaking point came during a storm. Rain lashed the windows, thunder rolled, and lightning lit the valley in strobing flashes. Between strikes of light, he glimpsed the shadow not outside but inside, looming in the corner of the room, darker than dark, taller than any man. He raised the lantern, the flame leaping wildly, and the shadow recoiled, dissolving into the wood like smoke. But the room stank faintly of rot afterwards, as though something had seeped into the grain. He never worked the tower again. Officially, he requested transfer due to stress. Unofficially, he warned his replacement. If you feel something watching, do not turn off the lantern. Do not trust the shadows in that tower. For whatever waits there, it has patience. And it only grows bolder when the light begins to fade. Search and rescue missions in the parks often follow a pattern. A call comes in, the team gathers, and they fan out across the trails, hoping for tracks, clothing, or some fragment of direction. But the case of the missing boy in the Blue Ridge was different. Instead of confusion or chaos, the rescuers found a trail, deliberate, precise, and terrifying in its intent. The boy had wandered away from a family picnic, no more than 8 years old, full of restless energy and curiosity. His parents reported him gone within minutes, and the rangers responded quickly. By evening, search teams were combing the area with torches, calling his name into the dark. What they found was not a frightened child stumbling blindly, but a path. A trail of stones. The first was discovered not far from the picnic site. A flat river stone, unnaturally white against the forest floor, placed neatly in the center of the trail. A few yards further, another stone, and then another, each spaced evenly, each pointing deeper into the woods. The boy was known to play with pebbles, but no one could explain how he might have gathered these smooth, identical stones in such a short time, nor why he would have laid them out so deliberately. The searchers followed the trail cautiously, their unease growing with every step. The stones led them off the main path, weaving between the pines, down into gullies, across streams. Always placed perfectly in line, as if measured by some unseen hand. They seemed to glow faintly in the torchlight, pale against the moss and soil, each one impossible to miss. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker, heavier. The stones led them into places the rangers themselves had rarely ventured, areas unmarked on tourist maps, where the trees grew closer and the ground sucked at their boots. Still, the trail continued, unbroken. A string of breadcrumbs that should have been comforting but felt instead like a trap. Then came the final clearing. In the center stood the largest stone yet, flat and wide like a table. The smaller stones circled it perfectly, as though forming an altar. But the boy was nowhere to be found. No footprints surrounded the stones. No scraps of clothing, no sign of struggle. The clearing was silent, too silent. The air so still it pressed against their ears. The rangers withdrew, shaken and confused, and returned with dogs at first light. Yet the dogs refused to enter the clearing. They barked and whined at its edge, straining against their leads but never stepping inside. When the rangers forced their way back, the stones were gone. Every single one. The altar was bare earth, as though nothing had ever been there. The boy was never found. His disappearance remains one of the most baffling cases in park records. Some whisper that the stones were not placed by him at all, but by something using him, guiding him step by step into the forest's grasp. The way the trail vanished overnight suggests intent, intelligence. Something watching, waiting, reclaiming its markers once their purpose was served. The family never stopped searching. To this day, they leave small piles of stones at trailheads, hoping he might follow them back as he once followed another path away. But the rangers who were there that night agree. No child laid that trail, and no human hand cleared it away. There are trails in every national park that are closed after dark. Some for safety, narrow ridges, sudden drops, treacherous footing. Others for reasons less clearly written, passed quietly from ranger to ranger without explanation. One such trail cut through the Blue Ridge, winding steeply through a gorge where the trees grew tall and dense, the canopy blotting out even moonlight. Officially, it was closed at dusk. Unofficially, rangers warned each other not to go near it at night. The ranger on duty that evening was patrolling the perimeter when he heard them. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, crunching through the dry leaves along the forbidden path. He froze, listening. Whoever it was moved slowly, evenly, not running or stumbling, but walking with intent. At first, he assumed it was a hiker ignoring the rules, and he prepared to issue a citation. But as he reached the trailhead, his torch caught nothing. The path was empty. The footsteps, however, continued deeper in, echoing off the trees. They didn't fade with distance. Instead, they circled, weaving from left to right, closer and then further, as though whoever made them was pacing the woods deliberately. He called out, voice strong, carrying into the gorge. No answer. Only the measured tread of footsteps, one after another, unervingly steady. He shone his torch down the trail, but the beam seemed swallowed by the dark, the trees pressing too tight to allow it to travel. Still, the sound grew nearer, until it seemed to come from no more than a few yards ahead. Yet nothing appeared. The strangest part was the rhythm. Human footsteps vary: stone, soil, root, the occasional shift in pace. But these were exact. Every crunch matched the last, as though repeated by a machine. The ranger's gut twisted. He stepped backward, heart thundering, and the footsteps mirrored him, step for step. When he stopped, the forest went still. a silence so deep it rang in his ears. Then, directly behind him, a single crunch of leaves. He spun, torch flaring across empty ground. Nothing. But the sense of presence was undeniable. Something standing too close. Something breathing the same air. He retreated quickly, almost stumbling, refusing to turn his back on the trail until he reached the safety of the main path. From then on, rangers avoided the closed trail at night. Some swore they heard the footsteps from a distance, echoing long after midnight, pacing endlessly as though waiting for someone foolish enough to follow. None ever did. And though no official report exists, those who've patrolled the area agree. Footsteps mean someone is walking. But not everything that walks in those woods is meant to be seen. Every ranger knows that lakes are magnets for trouble. Tourists underestimate their depth, children wander too close, and sometimes the calm surface hides treacherous currents below. But there is one lake in the Blue Ridge that unsettles even the most seasoned rangers. Not because of what is found there, but because of what waits beneath. It is a small body of water, tucked far from the main trails, often shrouded in mist that clings to its surface long after the sun has risen. Birds avoid its banks, and the usual chatter of frogs and insects is absent. The silence is the first thing people notice, a quiet so complete that even the sound of one's own breathing seems intrusive. Rangers rarely approach it alone. One evening, however, a ranger was sent to check reports of trespassers camping near the lake. As he descended the path, the forest grew stiller with every step. By the time he reached the shore, the silence pressed against him like a physical weight. His torch swept the banks, but there was no sign of tents, no smoke, no movement. Only the still black water, smooth as glass, reflecting the pale shimmer of the moon. Then he saw it, a shape beneath the surface. At first, he thought it was a log, pale and straight, but as his eyes adjusted, details emerged. The suggestion of limbs, a face, human, but not moving, not rising, suspended as though pinned by the weight of the lake itself. Its eyes, open, white, unblinking, stared directly upward, meeting his gaze through the water. He stumbled back, breath caught in his throat, but when he looked again, the figure had shifted, now closer to the shore. Its arms seemed to stretch upward, fingers long and gray, reaching for the surface. The ranger's instincts screamed at him to flee, but his legs felt locked. The air had thickened, the silence so deep it roared in his ears. Then came the ripple, not from wind, not from fish, but from something breaking the water below. A hand, thin, pale, slick with lake water, emerging slowly from the depths, rising higher until it clawed at the surface itself. He turned and ran, torch beam bouncing wildly through the trees, the silence behind him breaking only once, with the sound of water rushing, as though something vast had erupted from the lake. He did not stop until the trail widened and the normal noises of the forest returned. When he reported the encounter, his fellow rangers dismissed it as exhaustion. Yet others had stories too, glimpses of figures beneath the lake, faces staring up through the still water, arms that reached toward the surface only to vanish when approached. None of those figures have ever been recovered. No bodies. No missing persons found. Just shadows waiting beneath the black water, patient and watchful. The lake remains unmarked on tourist maps, a quiet omission. And those who know of it agree. The silence is not absence, but presence. Something waits there, beneath the surface, longing for someone to lean too close, to step too near, to touch the water that should never be touched. There are structures scattered deep within the forests that do not appear on maps. Some are hunting cabins, some are relics of long-abandoned settlements, their timbers collapsing beneath decades of moss and rain. But one cabin in the Blue Ridge has been spoken of in whispers among rangers, for it should not exist at all, and when sought, it cannot be found. The first account came from a ranger on an extended patrol. He had strayed from the main trail, following a deer path through a thicket, when he stumbled into a clearing. At its center stood a cabin. Its logs were darkened with age, the roof sagging slightly, yet smoke rose faintly from a stone chimney. A warm orange glow seeped through the cracks of shuttered windows. Curious, he approached. His first thought was that it belonged to a squatter, someone living off-grid without permission. But the closer he came, the more unease twisted in his gut. The air grew colder. The birdsong stopped, and though the chimney bled smoke, there was no scent of firewood or cooking, just a sharp metallic tang, like rust or blood. He circled the cabin, noting its intact door, its shuttered windows, but no signs of life. Finally, he placed a hand on the latch, intent on announcing himself. Before he could push it open, the glow inside flickered violently, as though a dozen candles had guttered out at once. The smoke ceased, the clearing darkened, and the cabin was gone. Where once had stood walls and roof, there was only grass, unbroken and untouched, as though nothing had ever been built there. Shaken, the ranger hurried back to the main trail. When he tried to relocate the spot the next day, he could not find it. Other rangers later reported similar sightings. Each time, the cabin appeared without warning, in clearings that should have been empty. Some saw it by daylight, some only at dusk, but always the same details. The glowing windows, the silent smoke, the oppressive quiet. None ever managed to enter, and always, when attention wavered, when eyes turned away for even a second, the cabin dissolved back into forest, leaving no trace behind. Legends grew around it. Some claimed it was the remnant of a family who vanished in the mountains long ago, their home lingering as an echo, replaying its final moments. Others believed it a lure, a trap, drawing the curious in with the promise of warmth, only to swallow them whole. Whatever the truth, the vanishing cabin remains a taboo subject. Rangers speak of it reluctantly, wary of giving it more power by acknowledging its existence. And those few who claim to have seen it share one warning. If you ever find yourself in the woods and notice a glow where no glow should be, do not approach. For some doors, once opened, will not let you leave again. Radios are a lifeline for rangers. In the endless sweep of forests, where trails vanish and cell service dies, the crackle of a radio can mean the difference between safety and silence. But sometimes, those radios carry more than human voices. Sometimes, they carry things that should never have been heard at all. One ranger was stationed alone in the backcountry during late autumn. His task simple: monitor trails, check for trespassers, and report in at regular intervals. The first 2 days passed quietly. His radio remained clear, except for the usual dispatch chatter. But on the third night, as the forest outside settled into its oppressive hush, the radio crackled to life. At first it was faint static, the usual background noise. Then came a voice, weak, trembling, gasping between words. Help, lost, can't, see. The ranger froze. He pressed the button, responding with calm professionalism, asking for location, landmarks, any detail at all. The reply was garbled, broken by static, but he thought he heard the words river and dark. He logged the emergency immediately and prepared to head out, but dispatch interrupted. No call had come through on their end. No one else was transmitting. The frequency was silent. Yet the voice continued. It rose again, closer now, urgent. Please, I can't. They're coming. The ranger demanded a name, but what came back chilled him to the bone. It was his name, spoken in a rasp, drawn out slowly, distorted through the static. His full name. And then, as though mocking him, the voice repeated it again and again, each time more warped, until it no longer sounded like speech but a wet, gurgling chant. The radio hissed violently, then went dead. Uneasy, he turned the dial through every channel, but the airwaves were empty, just the low hum of static. He considered hiking out, but duty held him in place. By dawn, the forest had returned to its usual rhythm, birdsong replacing the silence, and the radio behaved as though nothing had happened. When he reported it, dispatch dismissed the event as interference. Yet weeks later, another ranger in a different sector logged a nearly identical account. Same crackle, same plea for help, same unnatural distortion. And again, the voice ended by speaking the ranger's own name. Now, when new recruits are trained, they are given a quiet warning. If a voice comes over your radio at night, one that does not exist on dispatch logs, do not respond. Do not acknowledge it. Turn the dial, switch it off, wait for dawn. Because whatever calls from the static is not seeking rescue. It is seeking recognition. And once it knows your name, it does not easily forget.